Elena Martinez stood in front of the small mirror in her tiny apartment. She looked at herself carefully. Her white shirt was clean and pressed. Her black pants had no wrinkles. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked like what she was supposed to be tonight, a waitress. Nothing more, nothing less. She took a deep breath and picked up her bag. Tonight was going to be a long night. She had been hired by a catering company to work at a big party in Manhattan. The party was happening at the penthouse of Richard Thornton, one of the richest men in New York City. Elena had heard stories about him. People said he was cold and cruel. They said he treated people like they were nothing. But Elena did not care about any of that. She only cared about the money. The subway ride to Manhattan took 45 minutes. Elena stood the whole way because there were no empty seats. Her feet already hurt, and the night had not even started yet. She thought about her mother, Maria, who was lying in a hospital bed across town. The doctors said she needed more treatments, more medicine, more tests. All of those things cost money, money that Elena did not have. She also thought about her younger brother, Carlos. He was only 19 years old and studying at a community college. He wanted to become an engineer. He was smart and worked hard, but his tuition was expensive. Elena had promised him that she would help him finish school. She had promised him that he would not have to drop out like she did. When Elena arrived at the building, she looked up at it with wide eyes. It was the tallest building she had ever seen. The lobby was made of marble and gold. There were security guards everywhere. A man in a suit checked her name on a list and pointed her toward the service elevator. She was not allowed to use the main elevator. That was only for the guests. The service elevator took her to the top floor. When the doors opened, Elena stepped into a world she had never seen before. The penthouse was bigger than any apartment she had ever been inside. The ceilings were high and covered with beautiful paintings. The floors were made of shiny wood. There were flowers everywhere, roses, lilies, and orchids in tall glass vases. The furniture looked like it cost more than everything Elena owned in her entire life. A woman with a clipboard walked up to her. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she was in charge of all the waiters and waitresses for the night. She was a thin woman with sharp eyes and a cold voice. "You are late," Mrs. Patterson said, even though Elena was actually 5 minutes early. "I am sorry," Elena said quietly. She had learned long ago that it was better to apologize than to argue. Mrs. Patterson handed her a black apron and pointed to a long table covered with champagne glasses. "You will serve drinks tonight. Walk around the room. We'll offer champagne to the guests. Do not speak unless you are spoken to. Do not make eye contact. Do not embarrass us. Do you understand?" Elena nodded. "Yes, I understand." The guests started arriving at 8 o'clock. Elena watched them come through the main doors in their expensive clothes and shiny jewelry. The women wore long gowns made of silk and satin. Their diamonds sparkled under the lights. The men wore black suits and gold watches. They laughed loudly and shook hands with each other like old friends. Elena picked up her tray of champagne glasses and started walking around the room. She moved slowly and carefully, making sure not to bump into anyone. The guests took glasses from her tray without looking at her. They did not say thank you. They did not smile. To them, she was invisible. She was just a pair of hands holding a tray. As the night went on, Elena learned to stay in the background. She learned to move like a shadow. She watched the guests eat tiny pieces of food that probably cost more than her weekly grocery bill. She listened to them talk about their vacation homes and their private jets. She heard them complain about how hard it was to find good help these days. Elena felt like she was in a different world, a world where people had never known hunger or fear or worry, a world where money grew on trees and problems disappeared with a snap of a finger. It was a beautiful world, but it was not her world. She was just a visitor here. A ghost that no one could see. Around 10 o'clock, Elena saw him for the first time. Richard Thornton. He was standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by a group of people who hung on his every word. He was tall and handsome, with silver hair and a strong jaw. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Elena's apartment. He smiled and laughed, but there was something cold in his eyes, something sharp, something dangerous. Next to him stood a beautiful woman with long blonde hair and bright red lips. She wore a dress that sparkled like it was made of diamonds. Elena later learned that her name was Veronica. She was Richard's girlfriend. She was also the daughter of a famous senator. Veronica looked around the room like she owned it, like everyone in it belonged to her. Elena tried to stay away from them. She kept to the edges of the room and served her champagne quietly. But at one point she had to walk past Richard and Veronica to get to the other side of the room. As she passed them, her foot caught on the edge of a rug. She stumbled. One of the champagne glasses on her tray tipped over and fell to the floor. It did not break, but the champagne spilled onto the shiny wood floor. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at Elena. Her face turned red with embarrassment. She quickly knelt down and picked up the glass. She used a napkin from her apron to wipe up the spilled champagne. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. Veronica looked down at her with disgust. "Can you not do anything right?" she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "They really will hire anyone these days." Some of the guests laughed. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She stood up, kept her head down, and walked away as quickly as she could. But someone had noticed her. Richard Thornton was watching her with a strange look in his eyes. He had seen something that interested him. He had seen her worn shoes and her simple clothes. He had seen the way she moved with quiet grace, despite her embarrassment. And he had seen something else, something that gave him an idea. A cruel, terrible idea. Richard whispered something to one of his assistants. The assistant nodded and walked away. A few minutes later he came back with some information. Information about a waitress named Elena Martinez. Information that would change everything. Elena did not know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. She did not know that the richest man in the room had just learned her biggest secret, and she did not know that he was planning to use it against her in the cruelest way possible. For now, she just kept walking. She kept serving champagne. She kept being invisible. But soon, very soon, everyone in that room would know her name. Everyone would see her face, and everyone would witness the moment that was supposed to destroy her. The night was still young, and the worst was yet to come. Richard Thornton had been bored all evening. He had thrown this party because it was expected of him. Every year, he hosted a big charity gala at his penthouse. Rich and powerful people came from all over the city to drink his champagne and eat his food. They gave money to charity so they could feel good about themselves. And Richard smiled and shook their hands because that was what billionaires were supposed to do. But deep inside, Richard was bored. He had more money than he could ever spend. He had a beautiful girlfriend. He had a penthouse that people dreamed about. He had everything a man could want. But none of it made him happy anymore. The only thing that made him feel alive was power. The power to control people. The power to make them feel small. The power to remind everyone that he was on top and they were at the bottom. When the waitress spilled the champagne, Richard had barely noticed at first. These things happened at parties. But then he saw Veronica insult the girl. He saw the way the waitress kept her head down and walked away without saying a word. He saw the shame on her face, and something about it caught his attention. The girl was different from the other servers. She moved with a certain grace. Her hands were delicate and precise. Even when she was embarrassed, there was something proud about the way she held herself. Richard was curious. Who was this girl, and why did she look like she did not belong here? He called over his personal assistant, a young man named James. James was always nearby, always ready to do whatever Richard asked. He was loyal because Richard paid him very well. He was also loyal because he was afraid of what would happen if he was not. That waitress, Richard said quietly, pointing at Elena, the one who spilled the champagne. Find out everything about her. Her name, where she lives, where she went to school, everything. James nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Richard turned back to his guests and continued smiling and laughing as if nothing had happened. But his mind was somewhere else. He was already planning something. He just did not know what yet. 20 minutes later, James returned. He leaned close to Richard and spoke in a low voice. Her name is Elena Martinez. She is 24 years old. She lives in a small apartment in Queens with her mother and younger brother. Her mother is sick and in the hospital. Her brother is studying at a community college. Richard nodded slowly. This was interesting, but not surprising. Most people who worked as waitresses had sad stories. That was not what he was looking for. What else? He asked. James hesitated for a moment. There is something unusual, sir. I spoke with Mrs. Patterson, the catering manager. She told me something about the girl's background. Something she found when she checked the girl's work history. Go on. Elena Martinez used to be a student at Juilliard. Richard's eyes widened slightly. Juilliard was one of the most famous music schools in the world. Only the most talented students were accepted. It was almost impossible to get in Juilliard. Richard repeated. What did she study? Piano, James said. She was there on a full scholarship. Apparently, she was one of the most talented students in her year. Her teachers said she had the potential to become a world-class concert pianist. Richard was genuinely surprised now. He looked across the room at Elena. She was serving champagne again, moving quietly between the guests. She looked like nobody. She looked like nothing. But she had once been a star. What happened? Richard asked. Why did she leave? Her mother got sick, James explained. The medical bills were too expensive. Elena had to drop out of school to work and support her family. She never went back. Richard was quiet for a long moment. He watched Elena move through the crowd. He saw her worn shoes and her tired eyes. He saw the way she kept her head down, trying to be invisible, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt excited. Richard Thornton loved to watch people fall. He loved to see hope die in someone's eyes. He loved to remind people of what they had lost. And now, standing in his penthouse surrounded by the richest people in New York, he had found the perfect victim. This girl had once had everything. She had talent. She had a future. She had dreams. And she had lost it all. Now she was serving champagne to people who did not even look at her. She was invisible. She was nobody. But Richard was going to change that. He was going to put her in the spotlight. He was going to make everyone look at her. And then he was going to watch her fail. He turned to Veronica, who was standing beside him sipping champagne. She looked bored, which was normal for her. Veronica was always bored unless she was shopping or attending fashion shows. Darling, Richard said with a smile, I have an idea for some entertainment tonight. Veronica raised an eyebrow. Oh, what kind of entertainment? Richard nodded toward Elena. You see that waitress? The one you insulted earlier. Veronica looked at Elena with disgust. The clumsy one. What about her? She used to be a piano student at Juilliard, Richard said. A very talented one, apparently. She dropped out because her family needed money. Now she serves champagne at parties. Veronica laughed. How sad, these people and their little dreams. I was thinking, Richard continued, his voice smooth and calm, that we should give her a chance to perform tonight. We have a beautiful Steinway piano right there in the center of the room. Why not let her play for us? Veronica's eyes lit up with understanding. She smiled cruelly. You want to embarrass her. You want to watch her fail in front of everyone. She has not touched a piano in 3 years, Richard said. She will be nervous. She will make mistakes. And everyone will see what happens to people who think they can rise above their station. Veronica clapped her hands together like a child who had just been given a new toy. Oh, Richard, that is brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. I cannot wait to see the look on her face. Richard smiled. He had expected Veronica to approve. She loved watching other people suffer almost as much as he did. It was one of the reasons they were together. But wait, Veronica said, her smile fading slightly. What if she actually plays well? What if she is good? Richard shook his head. She will not be good. She has been working as a waitress for 3 years. Her hands are rough from carrying trays. Her mind is tired from worrying about money. She has probably forgotten everything she learned. Trust me, darling. This is going to be entertaining. Veronica nodded, satisfied. When are you going to do it? Soon, Richard said. Let me enjoy the moment a little longer. Let her feel safe. Let her think the worst is over. And then I will call her name and watch her world fall apart. Across the room, Elena had no idea what was coming. She was thinking about her mother. She was thinking about her brother. She was thinking about the money she would earn tonight and how she would use it to pay some of the bills that were piling up. She was not thinking about the piano that sat in the middle of the room. She tried not to look at it. Every time she passed it, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. The piano reminded her of everything she had lost, everything she had given up, everything she would never have again. 3 years ago, she had been a star. 3 years ago, her teachers had said she would perform at Carnegie Hall someday. 3 years ago, she had believed that her dreams would come true. Now she was serving champagne to people who did not even see her. Elena pushed those thoughts away. She had learned to stop dreaming. Dreams were for people who could afford them. She could not. She had a family to take care of. She had bills to pay. She did not have time for dreams. She picked up another tray of champagne and walked back into the crowd. She kept her head down. She stayed invisible. She did not notice Richard Thornton watching her with a cruel smile on his face. She did not notice Veronica whispering to her friends and pointing at her. She did not notice that she was about to become the star of the show. The clock on the wall showed 11 o'clock. In 1 hour, Richard would make his announcement. In 1 hour, Elena's life would change forever. In 1 hour, she would face the biggest moment of her life. But for now, she just kept serving champagne. She just kept being invisible. She just kept surviving. And she had no idea that the storm was about to hit. The clock struck midnight. The party was at its peak. Guests were laughing and drinking and dancing to the soft music that played from hidden speakers. The penthouse was alive with energy. Everyone was having a wonderful time. Everyone except Elena. She was exhausted. Her feet were aching from hours of walking on high heels. Her shoulders were sore from carrying heavy trays. Her smile was forced and fake. All she wanted was to go home, take off her shoes, and sleep. But the party was far from over, and the worst part of her night had not even begun. At exactly 12:15, Richard Thornton walked to the center of the room. He stood next to the grand Steinway piano that had been sitting there all night like a sleeping giant. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shiny, with keys that looked like they had never been touched. It probably cost more than most people's houses. Richard picked up a champagne glass and tapped it with a silver spoon. The soft ringing sound cut through the noise of the party. Slowly, the music stopped. The conversations faded. One by one, the guests turned to look at their host. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard said, his voice loud and confident, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity has been overwhelming. Together, we have raised over $2 million for charity. The crowd applauded. People smiled and nodded at each other. They were pleased with themselves. They had done their good deed for the year. Now they could go back to their comfortable lives without feeling guilty. Richard waited for the applause to die down. Then he smiled in a way that made Elena feel suddenly cold. Before we continue with our evening, he said, I have a special treat for you all. A little surprise that I think you will find very entertaining. The guests murmured with curiosity. What could the surprise be? A famous singer? A celebrity guest? Everyone leaned forward with excitement. I have just learned, Richard continued, that we have a very talented person among us tonight. Someone who once studied at one of the most famous music schools in the world. Someone who was told she would perform at Carnegie Hall one day. Elena froze. Her heart stopped beating. Her blood turned to ice. She knew, somehow, she knew what was coming. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide, but her feet would not move. Richard pointed directly at her. Our little waitress here, Miss Elena Martinez, was once a piano student at Juilliard. Every head in the room turned to look at Elena. She felt 200 pairs of eyes burning into her. She felt her face turn red. She felt her hands start to shake. The tray she was holding suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She was on a full scholarship, Richard said, his voice dripping with false kindness. Her teachers said she was one of the most talented students they had ever seen. But then she had to drop out. Life got in the way, as it often does. And now she served champagne at parties instead of playing piano at concert halls. Some of the guests laughed. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. Veronica was smiling widely, enjoying every moment of Elena's humiliation. I thought, Richard said, that we should give Miss Martinez a chance to show us what she can do. After all, we have this beautiful piano just sitting here. It would be a shame not to use it. So what do you say, ladies and gentlemen? Should we ask our waitress to play for us? The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. They loved the idea. It was different. It was unexpected. It was entertaining. Nobody stopped to think about how cruel it was. Nobody stopped to think about how Elena felt. To them, she was not a real person. She was just entertainment. Elena stood frozen in the middle of the room. She could not believe this was happening. Her biggest secret, the thing she never talked about, had just been exposed to a room full of strangers. They were all looking at her. They were all waiting. They were all expecting her to fail. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her side. The catering manager grabbed her arm and whispered sharply in her ear. Do it, Mrs. Patterson said. If you refuse, you will never work for this company again, and you will not be paid for tonight. Elena looked at her with wide, desperate eyes. Please, she whispered. I cannot. I have not played in 3 years. I will embarrass myself. Mrs. Patterson did not care. That is not my problem. Do what the client wants, or get out. Elena felt trapped. She needed this job. She needed the money. Her mother needed medicine. Her brother needed books for school. If she walked away now, she would lose everything. But if she played, she would humiliate herself in front of all these rich, powerful people. It was an impossible choice, and she had only seconds to make it. Richard was watching her with a satisfied smile. He could see her struggling. He could see her fear, and he was enjoying every moment of it. Come on, Miss Martinez, he called out. Do not be shy. We are all friends here. We just want to hear you play. The crowd laughed at his joke. Friends? As if any of them would ever be friends with a waitress. As if any of them would ever see her as an equal. Slowly, Elena set down her tray. Her legs felt like they were made of water. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She walked toward the piano. Each step felt like a mile. The crowd parted to let her through. She felt their eyes on her back. She heard their whispers. Look at her shoes, someone said. They are so worn out. Can she even play? Someone else asked. She looks terrified. This is going to be hilarious. Another voice said. I cannot wait to see her fail. Elena reached the piano and sat down on the bench. The seat was cold and hard. She looked at the keys in front of her. They were so white, so perfect, so familiar, and yet so far away. She had not touched a piano in 3 years. 3 long, painful years. The last time she had played was the day she left Juilliard. The day she packed up her small room and said goodbye to her teachers and her friends. The day she walked out of the building and never looked back. She had cried that day. She had cried for hours. She had left a piece of herself behind in those practice rooms. A piece she thought she would never get back. And now here she was, sitting at a grand piano in a billionaire's penthouse, surrounded by people who wanted to see her fail, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than a joke. Richard was standing nearby, watching her with cold, amused eyes. Veronica was giggling with her friends. The guests had their phones out, ready to record her humiliation and share it with the world. Elena looked at her hands. They were shaking badly. Her fingers were rough and dry from years of hard work. These were not the hands of a pianist anymore. These were the hands of a waitress, a cleaner, a survivor. She thought about standing up and walking away. She thought about telling them all that she would not play their game. She thought about keeping her dignity and her pride. But then she thought about her mother. She thought about the hospital bills and the medicine and the treatments. She thought about her brother, who was working so hard to build a better life. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made, all the dreams she had given up. And she realized something. She had already lost everything. Her career, her dreams, her future. What more could they take from her? What more could they destroy? Elena took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she placed her fingers on the piano keys. The room fell silent. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the keys. They were old friends. They were strangers. They were her past and her present all at once. She did not know if she could still play. She did not know if her fingers would remember the music. She did not know if she would succeed or fail, but she was going to find out. She was going to play in whatever happened next. She was going to face it with her head held high. Elena sat at the piano with her hands resting on the keys. She could feel the smooth ivory under her fingertips. It was cold at first, but it was warming up from the heat of her skin. The touch was so familiar, so right, and yet so terrifying. The room was completely silent. 200 people were watching her, waiting. Some of them were smiling cruelly. Some of them were curious. A few looked uncomfortable, like they knew something was wrong but were too afraid to say anything. Alina did not look at any of them. She kept her eyes on the keys. She tried to block out everything else. The whispers, the laughter, the phones recording her every move. She tried to remember a time when playing the piano was the happiest thing in the world. She thought about the first time she ever touched a piano. She was 5 years old. Her family was poor even back then. They lived in a tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood. But there was a community center down the street that had an old, out-of-tune piano in the corner. Alina used to sneak into that community center after school. She would sit at the piano and press the keys one by one. She loved the sounds they made. She loved how each key was different. She loved how she could make music with just her fingers. An old woman named Mrs. Chen worked at the community center. She noticed Alina playing one day and sat down next to her. Mrs. Chen had been a piano teacher in China before she came to America. She saw something special in Alina. "You have a gift," Mrs. Chen told her. "Your fingers are made for music." Mrs. Chen taught Alina for free. Every day after school, Alina would run to the community center and practice for hours. She learned to read music. She learned to play scales and chords. She learned to feel the music in her heart and let it flow through her hands. By the time she was 10, Alina could play pieces that most adults struggled with. By 15, she was winning competitions. By 18, she had been accepted to Juilliard on a full scholarship. Her mother had cried with happiness when she got the letter. Her brother had jumped up and down with excitement. Their little Alina was going to be a star. Their little Alina was going to make it out of poverty. Their little Alina was going to change their lives. And for 2 years, everything was perfect. Alina studied with the best teachers in the world. She practiced for 8 hours a day. Her professors said she had the potential to become one of the greatest pianists of her generation. They said Carnegie Hall was just a matter of time. Then her mother got sick. It started with a cough that would not go away. Then came the fevers. Then came the tests. Then came the terrible news. Cancer, advanced stage. The doctors said treatment was possible, but it would be expensive. Very expensive. Alina's family had no insurance. They had no savings. They had nothing. Just a tiny apartment and 3 people who loved each other more than anything in the world. Alina had to make a choice. She could stay at Juilliard and follow her dreams while her mother suffered, or she could leave school and get a job to pay for the treatments. It was not really a choice at all. Family came first. Always. Alina left Juilliard in the middle of her 2nd year. She found a job as a waitress at a restaurant downtown. The tips were good, and she could work long hours. She also took a second job cleaning offices at night. She slept 4 hours a day and worked the rest. The money was never enough. There were always more bills, more treatments, more medicines. Alina sold everything she owned. She sold her clothes, her books, her phone. She sold the small keyboard that Mrs. Chen had given her as a graduation gift. That was the hardest thing she ever did. 3 years passed. Her mother got a little better, then a little worse, then a little better again. It was a constant battle, but Alina never gave up. She worked and worked and worked. She forgot about her dreams. She forgot about music. She forgot about the person she used to be. Until tonight. Now she was sitting at a grand piano in a billionaire's penthouse. Her worn-out hands were resting on keys that cost more than she made in a year, and 200 rich people were waiting to watch her fail. Alina took a deep breath. She tried to remember the last piece she had played at Juilliard. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. It was 12 minutes long and required perfect technique, perfect emotion, and perfect control. Her professor had told her she was not ready for it. He had told her to wait another year, but Alina had insisted. She had wanted to prove herself. She had wanted to show everyone what she could do. She had played it perfectly. Her professor had cried when she finished. He had said it was the most beautiful performance he had ever heard. That was 3 years ago, a lifetime ago, a different person ago. Could she still play it now? Could her fingers still remember the notes? Could her heart still feel the music? Alina closed her eyes and thought about her mother lying in that hospital bed. She thought about her brother sitting in his college classroom, dreaming of a better future. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made and all the pain she had suffered. She had nothing left to lose. Nothing at all. Richard Thornton was watching her with an impatient expression. He checked his expensive watch and sighed loudly. "Any time now, Miss Martinez," he said. "We do not have all night." Veronica laughed. Maybe she forgot how to play. Maybe she never knew in the first place. The crowd chuckled. Alina heard their mocking voices like they were coming from far away. They sounded like ghosts, like echoes from another world. She opened her eyes and looked at the piano keys. She placed her left hand on the lower keys and her right hand on the higher ones. She positioned her fingers exactly the way Mrs. Chen had taught her all those years ago, and then she heard something, a voice in her head. It was not Mrs. Chen. It was not her mother. It was not her professor at Juilliard. It was her own voice. The voice of the girl she used to be. The girl who believed in dreams. The girl who thought anything was possible. "Play," the voice said. "Play like you used to. Play like your life depends on it. Play like nothing else matters." Alina felt tears forming in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. not until the music was done. She thought about the opening notes of Chopin's Ballade. For simple notes, played slowly and softly, they were the beginning of a story about loss and pain, and hope and redemption. Alina pressed the first key. The sound rang out through the silent room. It was pure and clear and beautiful. It floated up to the ceiling and echoed off the walls. She pressed the second key, then the third, then the fourth. The music had begun. Some of the guests looked confused. They had expected her to stumble, to freeze, to run away in shame. But instead, she was playing, and the notes coming from the piano were not the sounds of failure. They were the sounds of something else entirely. Richard's smile faded slightly. He exchanged a glance with Veronica. Something was not going according to plan. Alina did not notice. She was not in the penthouse anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere far away, a place where there were no bills to pay and no sick mothers and no cruel billionaires. She was in the music, and the music was carrying her home. Her fingers moved across the keys like they had never forgotten. 3 years of silence meant nothing. The music had been waiting inside her all along, waiting for this moment, waiting for this chance. Alina played the opening section of the ballade with perfect control. Her touch was soft and delicate. Her timing was flawless. Every note was exactly where it should be. And then the music began to build, louder and faster and more powerful. The melody climbed higher and higher. The harmonies grew richer and deeper. The emotions poured out of Alina like water from a broken dam. All the pain, all the fear, all the loneliness, all the love. It was all there in the music. Every note was a piece of her soul. The guests had stopped whispering. They had stopped laughing. They had stopped checking their phones. They were listening, really listening. For the first time all night, they were seeing Alina not as a waitress, not as a joke, but as a person with a gift, a person with a story, a person who was not going to let them break her. The music filled the room like a living thing. It wrapped around the guests and held them in place. It silenced their whispers and stilled their movements. It made them forget who they were and where they were. All that existed was the music. All that mattered was the sound. Elena's fingers danced across the keys with a grace that surprised even herself. 3 years of silence had not destroyed her gift. 3 years of hard work had not ruined her hands. The music was still there, deep inside her bones, waiting to be released. Chopin's Ballade No One Was a Journey. It started softly, with those 4 simple notes that Alina had played at the beginning. But then it grew. It expanded. It took the listener through valleys of sadness and mountains of joy. It told a story without words, a story that everyone could understand. Alina was no longer thinking about the notes. She was no longer thinking about her fingers. She was not even thinking about the crowd watching her. She was lost in the music. She was the music. She remembered the day her professor had explained the ballade to her. He was an old man with white hair and kind eyes. He had studied in Paris when he was young. He had met some of the greatest musicians in the world, and he had chosen Alina as his special student. This piece is about life, he had told her. It is about the moments that break us and the moments that heal us. It is about falling down and getting back up. When you play it, you must feel every note in your heart. You must give everything you have. If you hold back, the music will be empty. But if you let go, the music will set you free. Alina had not understood those words back then. She was 18 years old and full of dreams. She had never known real pain. She had never known real loss. She had played the notes perfectly, but she had not felt them. Not really. But now she understood. Now she knew what it meant to fall. She knew what it meant to lose everything. She knew what it meant to keep going even when there was no hope left, and she poured all of that into the music. The ballade moved into its second section. This was the part that most pianists struggled with. The tempo changed from slow to fast. The left hand had to play a complicated pattern while the right hand carried the melody. It required perfect coordination and complete focus. Alina did not struggle. Her hands moved together like they were one creature. Her left hand hammered out the rhythm while her right hand sang the melody. The music grew louder and more intense. It filled every corner of the penthouse. It shook the windows and rattled the champagne glasses. Some of the guests had tears in their eyes. They did not know why they were crying. They did not know this girl. They did not know her story. But the music told them everything. The music showed them her pain and her strength and her beauty. An old woman in a silver dress was wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. A young man in a business suit was staring at Alina with his mouth open. Even some of the waiters and waitresses had stopped working to listen. Mrs. Patterson stood in the corner, her cold expression replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. Richard Thornton was no longer smiling. His plan had been to humiliate Alina. He had wanted to watch her fail. He had wanted to remind her that she was nothing, that she would always be nothing, but something had gone wrong, very wrong. Instead of failing, Alina was succeeding. Instead of falling apart, she was coming together. Instead of showing weakness, she was showing strength. Richard looked at Veronica. His girlfriend was not laughing anymore. She was staring at Alina with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. This was not what they had expected. This was not entertaining. This was something else entirely. The ballade reached its climax. This was the most difficult part of the piece. The music became a storm. The notes crashed against each other like waves against rocks. The melody rose higher and higher until it seemed like it would break through the ceiling and fly into the sky. Elena's whole body was moving with the music. Her shoulders swayed. Her head nodded. Her eyes were closed, and there was a look of pure peace on her face. She was not in the penthouse anymore. She was somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the reach of cruel billionaires and mocking guests. She was home. The storm in the music began to fade. The notes became softer, gentler. The melody returned, but it was different now. It was sadder and more beautiful. It was the sound of acceptance, the sound of letting go. Elena thought about her mother. She thought about holding her hand in the hospital room. She thought about the machines beeping and the doctors talking and the fear that never went away. She thought about her brother. She thought about helping him with his homework when he was little. She thought about his smile when he got accepted to college. She thought about how proud she was of him. She thought about herself. She thought about the little girl who used to sneak into the community center to play the old piano. She thought about the teenager who won competitions and dreamed of Carnegie Hall. She thought about the woman who gave up everything for her family. And she realized that she was still that girl. She was still that dreamer. The music had never left her. It had just been waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for this moment. The ballad was ending now. The final notes were the same as the opening notes, but they sounded different. They sounded like they had traveled a long distance. They sounded like they had seen things and felt things and learned things. Elena played the last note and let it ring out through the room. The sound hung in the air for a long moment. It faded slowly, like a sunset disappearing below the horizon. Then there was silence. Complete and total silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Elena opened her eyes and looked at her hands. They were shaking slightly. Her fingers were red from pressing the keys. There was sweat on her forehead and tears on her cheeks. She did not remember crying. She did not remember anything from the last 12 minutes. It was all a blur of music and emotion. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked at the crowd. 200 faces stared back at her, and in their eyes, she saw something she had not expected. She saw respect, she saw wonder, she saw awe, and then the silence broke. It started with one person clapping, then another, and suddenly the whole room exploded with applause. People were standing up, people were cheering, people were crying. The old woman in the silver dress was clapping harder than anyone. The young man in the business suit was whistling and shouting. Even some of Richard's closest friends were on their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Elena sat at the piano, frozen in shock. She could not believe what was happening. She had expected failure. She had expected humiliation. She had expected to confirm everything that Richard Thornton believed about her. Instead, she had done something else. She had shown them who she really was. She had shown them what she could do. She had turned their cruelty into her triumph. Richard Thornton stood at the edge of the crowd with a dark expression on his face. His plan had completely backfired. Instead of destroying Elena, he had given her a stage. Instead of humiliating her, he had created a moment that everyone would remember. He looked at Veronica, hoping for some support. But Veronica was not looking at him. She was looking at Elena with a strange expression that might have been jealousy. The applause continued for a long time. People would not stop clapping. They kept cheering and shouting and stamping their feet. It was the most genuine reaction the penthouse had seen all night. Elena finally stood up from the piano bench. Her legs were weak, and she had to hold on to the piano for support. She gave a small bow, not knowing what else to do, and then something happened that nobody expected. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with gray hair and sharp eyes. She wore a simple black dress with a single string of pearls around her neck. She did not look like the other guests. She looked different. She looked important. The woman walked up to Elena and looked her directly in the eyes. "Young lady," she said, her voice clear and strong. "That was one of the most extraordinary performances I have heard in 40 years. The room fell silent again. Everyone was watching. Everyone was listening. The woman turned to look at Richard Thornton. Her eyes were cold and hard. "And you, Mr. Thornton," she said, "should be ashamed of yourself for what you tried to do here tonight." Richard's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Elena did not know who this woman was. She did not know why everyone seemed so afraid of her. But she had a feeling that everything was about to change. The night was not over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. The room was completely still. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody even looked at their phones. All eyes were on the old woman who had just spoken. All ears were waiting to hear what would happen next. Elena stood by the piano, her heart still racing from the performance. She looked at the woman who had defended her. There was something familiar about her face. But Elena could not remember where she had seen it before. The woman was small and thin, but she stood with the confidence of someone much larger. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun. Her black dress was elegant but not flashy. She wore no diamonds or gold, just a single string of pearls that glowed softly in the light. But it was her eyes that stood out the most. They were sharp and intelligent, like the eyes of a hawk. They seemed to see everything and miss nothing. And right now, they were focused on Richard Thornton with an expression of pure disgust. Richard had recovered from his initial shock. He put on his charming smile and walked toward the woman with his arms spread wide. "Mrs. Chen," he said smoothly, "I did not realize you had arrived. Welcome to my humble home." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Chen. The woman's name was Chen, just like her first piano teacher. But that was impossible. Her Mrs. Chen had been poor. She had worked at a community center. She could not be the same person as this elegant woman at a billionaire's party. The old woman did not return Richard's smile. She did not shake his hand. She just looked at him with those sharp eyes. "Save your charm for someone who wants it," she said coldly. "I saw what you did tonight. I saw how you tried to humiliate this young woman. It was cruel and it was wrong." Richard's smile faltered. "Mrs. Chen, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I was simply giving our waitress a chance to shine. I thought it would be fun for everyone." The woman's voice was like ice. "You called her out in front of 200 people. You exposed her private history without her permission. You expected her to fail so you could laugh at her. That is not fun, Mr. Thornton. That is bullying." The guests were watching in stunned silence. Nobody had ever spoken to Richard Thornton like this. He was one of the richest men in New York. He owned buildings and companies and politicians. People were afraid of him. People respected him. People did not call him a bully to his face. But this old woman did not seem afraid at all. Richard's face was turning red. Elena could see the anger building behind his eyes. He was not used to being challenged. He was not used to losing. "With all due respect," Mrs. Chen, he said through gritted teeth, "this is my party and my home. I can do whatever I want here." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, you can. And I can do whatever I want with my money, including deciding which charities to support and which businesses to invest in." The color drained from Richard's face. Elena did not understand what was happening, but she could see that Richard was scared. Really scared. A man standing nearby leaned over to his wife and whispered something. Elena was close enough to hear. "That is Margaret Chen," he said. "But Margaret Chen, she is worth more than Thornton. She owns half the real estate in Manhattan." Elena's eyes went wide. Margaret Chen, she had heard that name before. Everyone had heard that name. Margaret Chen was one of the richest women in America. She had started with nothing and built an empire. She gave away millions of dollars every year to schools and hospitals and charities, but that was not why Elena's heart was pounding. Margaret Chen had also started a famous music program for poor children. Elena had read about it in a magazine years ago. The program gave free piano lessons to kids who could not afford them. It had produced dozens of successful musicians over the years, and now Elena remembered where she had seen Margaret Chen's face before. It was in a photograph on the wall of the community center, a photograph of a young woman sitting at a piano, a photograph that Mrs. Chen had pointed to once and said, "That was me, many years ago." Could it be possible? Could the Mrs. Chen who taught Elena when she was 5 years old be the same person as Margaret Chen, one of the richest women in America? Elena's head was spinning. She could not think clearly. Too much had happened tonight. Too many emotions. Too many surprises. Margaret Chen turned away from Richard and walked toward Elena. Her sharp eyes softened as she looked at the young woman standing by the piano. "You do not remember me, do you?" Margaret said gently. Elena shook her head. "I am sorry. I am not sure." Margaret smiled. It was a warm smile, full of kindness. "I used to teach piano at a community center in Queens. Many years ago, there was a little girl who used to come every day after school. She had big brown eyes and quick fingers. She could barely reach the pedals, but she played like an angel." Tears began to fall down Elena's cheeks. "Mrs. Chen, from the community center." Margaret nodded. "I watched you grow up through that piano, Elena. I watched you win competitions and get into Juilliard. I was so proud of you. And then I heard that you had to leave school because your mother got sick. It broke my heart." Elena was crying openly now. She did not care that 200 people were watching. She did not care that her makeup was ruined. All she could think about was the kind old woman who had taught her to love music. "Why did you never tell me?" Elena asked. "Why did you never say who you really were?" Margaret reached out and took Elena's hands in hers. They were small hands, wrinkled with age, but they were strong. "Because I did not want you to think I was helping you because of money," Margaret said. "I wanted you to succeed because of your talent, not because of my wealth. I wanted you to earn your dreams, not have them given to you." Elena nodded through her tears. She understood. Mrs. Chen had always believed in hard work and dedication. She had never taken shortcuts, and she had not wanted Elena to take them either. "But now," Margaret continued, "I think it is time for me to help, not because you need charity, but because you deserve a second chance. What you did tonight, playing that piece after 3 years away from the piano, that took more courage than most people have in their entire lives." Margaret turned to face the crowd. Her voice was clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember this night. I want you to remember what you saw here. You saw a young woman who gave up her dreams to take care of her family. You saw a man try to destroy her for his own amusement, and you saw her rise above it all with grace and dignity." She looked directly at Richard, who was standing at the edge of the crowd like a ghost. "That is the difference between true strength and false power. Mr. Thornton has money and influence, but he has no heart. This young woman has nothing but her talent and her courage, but she has everything that matters." The room was silent. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do that then. Slowly, people began to clap. It started with one person, then spread to another, then another. Soon the whole room was applauding. But this time, they were not just clapping for Elena's performance. They were clapping for her story. They were clapping for her courage. They were clapping because, for the first time all night, they had witnessed something real. Elena stood in the middle of the applause, holding Margaret Chen's hands, tears streaming down her face. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was not invisible anymore. The applause slowly died down. The guests began to whisper among themselves. Everyone was talking about what they had just witnessed. Everyone was looking at Elena with new eyes. Margaret Chen still held Elena's hands. She looked at the young woman with the eyes of a proud teacher, a proud friend, a proud grandmother. "Come with me," Margaret said softly. "Let us find a quiet place to talk." Elena nodded. She was exhausted. Her legs were weak, and her hands were still shaking. She wanted nothing more than to sit down and catch her breath. Margaret led her through the crowd. People moved aside to let them pass. Some of them reached out to touch Elena's arm or pat her shoulder. They smiled at her and nodded with respect. It was strange. An hour ago, these same people had looked right through her like she was invisible. Now they were treating her like she was somebody important. They walked to a small balcony at the edge of the penthouse. The night air was cold, but it felt good on Elena's hot face. The city sparkled below them like a sea of stars. Cars moved through the streets like tiny ants. The world kept turning, even though Elena's life had just changed forever. Margaret closed the glass door behind them. They were alone now, away from the noise and the crowd and the drama. "Sit down," Margaret said, pointing to a small bench. "You look like you are about to fall over." Elena sat down gratefully. Her legs thanked her immediately. She had been standing for hours, and the stress of the performance had drained every bit of energy from her body. Margaret sat down next to her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked out at the city and listened to the distant sounds of traffic. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "Do you know why I came to this party tonight?" she asked. Elena shook her head. "I thought you did not like Richard Thornton." Margaret laughed softly. "I do not. He is everything I despise. Arrogant, cruel, empty inside. But my foundation gives money to the charity he supports tonight, children's hospitals. It is a good cause, even if the host is a bad person." Elena nodded. She understood. Sometimes you had to work with people you did not like, to help people you cared about. "I almost did not come," Margaret continued. "I was tired. I wanted to stay home and read a book, but something told me I should be here tonight. Something told me that I was needed." She turned to look at Elena with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "And then I saw you, standing there with your tray of champagne glasses. I recognized you immediately. You have the same eyes you had when you were 5 years old, big and brown and full of fire." Elena felt tears forming again. She had cried more tonight than she had in years. "I watched you all evening," Margaret said. "I saw how hard you worked. I saw how the other guests treated you. And I saw what Richard Thornton did. When he called your name and pointed at you, I wanted to walk over and slap him across the face." Elena could not help but smile at the image of this tiny old woman slapping a billionaire. "But then you sat down at the piano," Margaret continued, "and you started to play. And I knew that you did not need me to save you. You were going to save yourself." Margaret reached into her small purse and pulled out a business card. She handed it to Elena. "This is my personal number," she said. "I want you to call me tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about." Elena looked at the card. It was simple and elegant, with just a name and a phone number. Margaret Chen, no titles, no company names, just the name of a woman who had changed the world. "What do you want to talk about?" Elena asked. Margaret smiled. "Your future. I have a foundation that gives scholarships to talented musicians who have faced hardship. It is called the Second Chance Program. I started it 20 years ago because I believe that talent should not be wasted just because life is unfair." Elena's heart began to beat faster. Was this really happening? Was she dreaming? "I want to offer you a full scholarship to return to Juilliard," Margaret said. "All your tuition, your living expenses, your books, everything. You will not have to worry about money. You will only have to worry about your music." Elena could not speak. The words were stuck in her throat. She had dreamed about this moment for 3 years. She had imagined it 1,000 times. And now it was happening. It was really happening. "But that is not all," Margaret continued. "I also want to help your mother. I have connections with some of the best cancer doctors in the country. I will make sure she gets the best treatment available, and I will pay for all of it." Tears were flowing freely down Elena's face now. She did not even try to stop them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do all of this for me?" Margaret took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Because I was you once," she said. "I was a poor girl with a big dream. I had to fight for everything I have. People laughed at me. People told me I would never succeed, but I proved them wrong. And I promised myself that when I had the power to help others like me, I would do it." She looked out at the city lights. "I have helped hundreds of young people over the years, pianists, violinists, singers, dancers. Some of them became famous. Some of them did not, but all of them got a chance to follow their dreams. That is all I ever wanted to give them. A chance. Alina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her makeup was completely ruined now. She probably looked terrible, but she did not care. I do not know how to thank you, she said. Margaret shook her head. You do not need to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Anything. When you become successful, and you will become successful, I want you to help others like I helped you. Pay it forward. That is all I ask. Alina nodded. I promise. They sat together in silence for a few more minutes. The cold air felt clean and fresh. The city lights twinkled below them. For the first time in 3 years, Alina felt hope. Real hope. Not the fake hope that comes from pretending everything is okay, but the real hope that comes from knowing that things can get better. The glass door opened behind them. A young man in a suit stepped onto the balcony. He looked nervous. Mrs. Chen, he said, I am sorry to interrupt, but several people inside want to speak with you, and the press has arrived. They heard about what happened and they want to interview the young lady. Margaret looked at Alina. Are you ready to go back inside? Alina took a deep breath. She was tired and emotional and overwhelmed, but she was also stronger than she had been an hour ago. She had faced her biggest fear and survived. She had played the piano in front of 200 people who wanted her to fail, and she had won. Yes, she said, I am ready. They stood up and walked back toward the glass door. Before they went inside, Margaret stopped and looked at Alina one more time. Remember this night, she said. Remember how it felt to be afraid and to do it anyway. That is courage. That is what separates the people who succeed from the people who give up. Alina nodded. She would remember. She would remember every moment of this night for the rest of her life. They walked back into the party together. The crowd parted to let them through. People were still whispering and staring, but this time, the whispers were different. This time, the stares were full of admiration instead of mockery. Alina was not invisible anymore. She was not a ghost. She was not just a waitress serving champagne. She was Alina Martinez, a pianist, a daughter, a sister, a fighter, and her story was just beginning. While Alina and Margaret were talking on the balcony, something was happening inside the penthouse. Something that Richard Thornton had never expected. Something that would change his life forever. The guests were turning against him. It started slowly. A few people whispering in corners. A few cold looks from across the room. A few business partners suddenly remembering that they had somewhere else to be. Richard tried to pretend that everything was normal. He walked around the room with a glass of champagne in his hand, smiling and laughing like nothing had happened. But nobody was smiling back. Nobody was laughing at his jokes. People were looking at him differently now. They were looking at him like he was something dirty, something shameful. One of his oldest business partners, a man named Howard Wells, walked up to him with a serious expression on his face. Richard, Howard said quietly, we need to talk. Richard put on his best smile. Of course, Howard, what is on your mind? Howard looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Then he leaned in close. What you did tonight was wrong, he said. I have known you for 20 years. I have done business with you. I have defended you when others said you were ruthless. But this was different. This was cruel for no reason. Richard's smile faded. It was just a bit of fun. Howard, you know how these parties can be boring. Howard shook his head. It was not fun. It was bullying. And the whole world is going to know about it by morning. He pointed to the corner of the room. A group of guests were looking at their phones and talking excitedly. Someone recorded the whole thing. Howard said, the video is already online. It has been shared thousands of times in the last hour. People are calling you a monster. They are calling for boycotts of your businesses. This is a disaster. Richard's face went pale. He grabbed his own phone from his pocket and searched for his name. What he found made his blood run cold. The video was everywhere. Someone had recorded the entire incident from the moment Richard pointed at Alina to the moment Margaret Chen called him out. The comments were brutal. People were angry. They were calling Richard every name he could imagine. They were promising to never do business with him again. Richard felt the room spinning around him. This was not supposed to happen. Alina was supposed to fail. She was supposed to embarrass herself. He was supposed to be the winner, but instead, he had become the villain. And the whole world was watching. Veronica appeared at his side. Her beautiful face was twisted with anger. What did you do? She hissed. My father is going to see this video. My family is going to be associated with you. This is a nightmare. Richard tried to reach for her hand. Veronica, please. We can fix this. She pulled away from him like his touch was poison. Fix this? How are you going to fix this? You humiliated a poor girl who was just trying to earn money for her sick mother. You tried to destroy her in front of everyone. And then she turned out to be amazing. And then Margaret Chen, one of the most respected women in America, called you a bully on camera. She laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was cold and bitter. You know what the worst part is? Veronica said. The worst part is that I went along with it. I laughed at her too. And now everyone thinks I am just as bad as you. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but Veronica cut him off. We are done, she said. I am leaving. Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not ever speak to me again. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Richard watched her go. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to beg her to stay, but his feet would not move. His pride would not let him around the room. Guests were starting to leave. They made excuses about early mornings and long drives, but Richard knew the truth. They were running away. They did not want to be associated with him anymore. They did not want to be seen at the party of the man who had tried to humiliate a struggling waitress. Within an hour, the penthouse was almost empty. The caterers were cleaning up the tables. The musicians had packed their instruments and left. The beautiful flowers were wilting in their vases. Richard stood in the middle of the room alone. The champagne glass in his hand felt heavy. The silence felt loud. He looked around at his expensive furniture and his priceless paintings and his stunning views of the city. None of it meant anything anymore. He had spent his whole life collecting power and money and things. He had stepped on people to get to the top. He had crushed anyone who got in his way, and he had never felt bad about it. Not once, but tonight was different. Tonight, he had tried to crush someone who did not deserve it, someone who had done nothing wrong, someone who was just trying to survive. And she had won. Elena Martinez, the waitress with the worn-out shoes, had beaten him. She had turned his cruelty into her triumph. She had made him look like a monster in front of the whole world. Richard walked to the piano and looked at it. The keys were still warm from Elena's fingers. He could almost hear the music she had played, that beautiful, heartbreaking music that had moved everyone to tears. He had never learned to play the piano. He had never learned to create anything beautiful. All he knew how to do was take and destroy and consume. And for the first time in his life, he wondered if that was enough. His phone buzzed. It was a text from one of his investors. The man wanted to have an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. He wanted to discuss pulling his money out of Richard's company. It was the third text like that in the last hour. Richard put the phone back in his pocket. He would deal with it tomorrow. Right now, he just wanted to be alone. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Elena was starting a new chapter of her life. Margaret Chen had promised to help her. She would go back to Juilliard. She would finish her degree. She would probably become famous. And Richard would be remembered as the villain who tried to stop her. It was not fair, he thought. He had worked hard for everything he had. He had sacrificed and struggled and fought. He deserved his success. He deserved his wealth. He deserved his power. But even as he thought these things, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered something else. It whispered that he had never really struggled. Not like Elena, he had grown up with money. He had gone to the best schools. He had inherited his first million from his parents. Elena had grown up with nothing. She had worked for everything she had. And when life knocked her down, she got back up and kept fighting. That was the difference between them. Richard had power, but Elena had strength. Richard had money, but Elena had heart. Richard had everything a person could want, but Elena had everything that mattered. The sun was starting to rise over the city. Pink and orange light spread across the sky. A new day was beginning. Richard watched the sunrise with empty eyes. He did not know what the future held. He did not know if he could rebuild his reputation. He did not know if anyone would ever respect him again. But he knew one thing for certain. He would never forget this night. He would never forget the waitress who played the piano. He would never forget the moment when everything changed, and somewhere deep inside, in a part of himself that he had buried long ago, Richard Thornton felt something he had not felt in years. He felt shame. 1 month had passed since the night of the party. 1 month since Elena Martinez played Chopin in a billionaire's penthouse. 1 month since everything changed. The video had gone viral within hours. By the next morning, it had been viewed over 5 million times. By the end of the week, that number had grown to 50 million. News stations around the world picked up the story. Newspapers wrote articles with headlines like "Waitress stuns cruel billionaire with amazing piano performance and the pianist who refused to be broken." Elena's face was everywhere. On television screens, on computer monitors, on phone screens in coffee shops and subway cars. People who had never met her felt like they knew her. They sent her messages of support. They shared her story with their friends and families. They cried when they watched her play. For the first time in her life, Elena was famous, but she did not feel famous. She felt overwhelmed. She felt confused. She felt like she was watching someone else's life from far away. The day after the party, she called the number on Margaret Chen's business card. Margaret answered on the first ring. "I was hoping you would call," Margaret said warmly. "Are you ready to change your life?" Elena was not sure if she was ready, but she said yes anyway. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Margaret's lawyers drew up the scholarship papers. Her medical team took over Maria's treatment. Her assistants helped Elena fill out the paperwork to re-enroll at Juilliard. Elena's mother cried when she heard the news. She was still weak from her illness, but she had enough strength to wrap her arms around her daughter and hold her tight. "I am so proud of you," Maria whispered. "I always knew you would find your way back to the music." Carlos, Elena's brother, was equally emotional. He had watched the video dozens of times. Each time, he cried at the same moment. The moment when Elena finished playing and the room exploded with applause. "You showed them," Carlos said proudly. "You showed all of them who you really are." Elena moved into a small apartment near the Juilliard campus. It was paid for by Margaret's foundation, along with her tuition, her books, and a monthly allowance for living expenses. For the first time in 3 years, Alina did not have to worry about money. She could focus entirely on her music. Her first day back at school was strange and wonderful. Some of her old professors were still there. They welcomed her with open arms and tears in their eyes. "We never stopped believing in you," her piano professor told her. "We knew you would come back someday." Alina threw herself into her studies with more passion than ever before. She practiced for 8 hours a day. She took extra classes. She learned new pieces and polished old ones. She was determined to make the most of her second chance, but she also found time to visit her mother every week. Maria was responding well to the new treatments. The doctors said her cancer was shrinking. They said she had a good chance of making a full recovery. Alina would sit by her mother's hospital bed and play recordings of her practice sessions. Maria would close her eyes and listen with a peaceful smile on her face. "This is the best medicine," Maria would say. "Better than any drug. My daughter's music." Meanwhile, Richard Thornton's life was falling apart. The viral video had destroyed his reputation. Business partners cancelled their deals. Investors pulled their money. Newspapers that used to praise him now wrote articles about his cruelty and arrogance. His company lost 30% of its value in the first week after the party. By the end of the month, that number had grown to 50%. Richard was forced to sell several of his properties just to stay afloat. Veronica never spoke to him again. She released a public statement saying that she had ended their relationship and that she did not support his behavior. Her famous father went even further, calling Richard a disgrace to humanity in a television interview. One by one, Richard's friends abandoned him. The people who used to laugh at his jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. The people who used to beg for his attention now pretended they did not know him. He was alone, truly alone. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be invisible. But perhaps the most surprising development was what happened to the other guests at the party. Many of them had been touched by Elena's performance. Many of them had felt ashamed of how they had treated her. And many of them decided to make changes in their own lives. The old woman in the silver dress started volunteering at a homeless shelter. The young man in the business suit quit his job at an investment bank and became a music teacher. Even Mrs. Patterson, the cold catering manager, began treating her workers with more kindness and respect. Elena's story had changed more than just her own life. It had changed everyone who witnessed it. As the months passed, Elena's talent grew stronger and stronger. She performed at student concerts and recitals. She won competitions that brought her national attention. Music critics began writing about her as the most promising young pianist in America. But Elena never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the years of struggle and sacrifice. She never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. Every month, she visited the community center in Queens where she had first learned to play. She gave free lessons to children from poor families. She told them her story and encouraged them to follow their dreams. "Life will knock you down," she would tell them. "People will try to break you. But if you have something you love, something that makes your heart sing, hold on to it. Never let it go. It will save you when nothing else can." The children would listen with wide eyes. They would touch the piano keys with careful fingers. And sometimes Elena would see a spark in their eyes. The same spark that Mrs. Chen had seen in her eyes. So many years ago, Elena also stayed in close contact with Margaret Chen. They had dinner together once a month. They talked about music and life and dreams. Margaret became like a grandmother to Elena, a mentor, a friend. "You are doing exactly what I hoped you would do," Margaret told her one evening. "You are not just taking your second chance. You are creating second chances for others. That is the mark of a true artist. Not just talent, but heart." Elena smiled. She thought about the night of the party. She thought about the fear she had felt when she sat down at the piano. She thought about the music that had poured out of her. Almost without her control, she had been so afraid of failing, so afraid of proving Richard Thornton right. But in the end, her fear had become her fuel. Her pain had become her power. And now, 1 year after the worst night of her life, Elena Martinez was ready to take the next step. She had been invited to perform at Carnegie Hall. The dream she had given up on, the dream she thought was dead, was about to come true, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to stop her. The night had finally arrived. 2 years after the party at Richard Thornton's penthouse, Elena Martinez stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in the world. She was wearing a beautiful black dress that Margaret Chen had bought for her. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like a different person from the waitress who had served champagne at that party so long ago. But inside, she was still the same Elena, the same girl who had learned to play on an old piano at a community center in Queens, the same young woman who had given up her dreams to take care of her family, the same person who had been afraid and alone and invisible. Except now, she was not afraid anymore. Elena peeked through the curtains at the audience. The hall was completely full. Over 2,000 people had come to hear her play. They sat in velvet seats, dressed in their finest clothes, waiting with anticipation. In the front row, she could see her mother. Maria was sitting in a wheelchair, but she was smiling widely. Her cancer was in remission now. The doctors said she was healthy. The treatments had worked. She was going to live. Next to Maria sat Carlos. He had graduated from college last spring with honors. He was now working as an engineer at a big company in Manhattan. He had a good job and a bright future, and he had bought his ticket to the concert with his own money. My sister is playing at Carnegie Hall, he had told everyone at his office. I would not miss it for anything in the world. A few seats away sat Margaret Chen. The old woman was wearing her trademark simple black dress and pearl necklace. Her sharp eyes were fixed on the stage, waiting for her protege to appear. Margaret had made all of this possible. Her scholarship had paid for Elena's education. Her doctors had saved Maria's life. Her foundation had given Olena a second chance when no one else would. But Margaret always said that she had not given Olena anything. She had simply opened a door. Elena had been the one to walk through it. Elena looked at the piano sitting in the center of the stage. It was a Steinway, just like the one at Richard Thornton's penthouse. But this one was different. This one was hers. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, all the scales and exercises and difficult passages, all the tears of frustration and cries of joy, all the moments when she wanted to give up and all the moments when she pushed through. It had been the hardest 2 years of her life, and also the most rewarding. Her professors had pushed her to her limits. They had demanded perfection. They had refused to accept anything less than her best, and Elena had risen to the challenge every single time. "You are ready," her piano professor had told her before the concert. "You have been ready for a long time. Now go out there and show the world who you are." Elena took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and thought about all the people who had helped her along the way. Mrs. Chen at the community center, who had seen a spark in a little girl and nurtured it into a flame. Her mother, who had sacrificed everything so Elena could have a better life. Her brother, who had never stopped believing in her, even when she had stopped believing in herself. Margaret Chen, who had appeared at the darkest moment of her life and offered her a hand, and even Richard Thornton, who had tried to destroy her and instead had given her the stage she needed to rise. Elena opened her eyes. It was time. She walked out onto the stage. The audience burst into applause. The sound washed over her like a wave of warmth. She smiled and gave a small bow. As she walked to the piano, she noticed something. A man sitting in the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows. He was wearing a simple gray suit. His hair was grayer than it used to be. His face was lined with stress and exhaustion. It was Richard Thornton. Elena stopped for just a moment. Their eyes met across the vast hall. She could see the shame in his eyes, the regret, the pain. For a long time, Elena had hated him. She had wished terrible things upon him. She had dreamed of watching him suffer the way he had tried to make her suffer. But now, standing on the stage of Carnegie Hall with her dreams finally coming true, Elena felt something unexpected. She felt pity. Richard Thornton had lost everything. His money, his power, his friends, his reputation. He was a broken man, sitting alone in the back of a concert hall, watching the woman he had tried to destroy achieve everything he never could. Elena gave him a small nod, not of forgiveness, exactly, but of acknowledgement. She saw him, she recognized his presence, and then she moved on. She sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench. The audience fell silent. 2,000 people held their breath. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. She felt the familiar smoothness under her fingertips. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She felt the eyes of everyone she loved watching her from the front row. And then she began to play. She had chosen Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece she had played at Richard Thornton's party, the piece that had changed her life, the piece that had saved her. But this time, it was different. This time, she was not playing to prove anything to anyone. She was not playing out of desperation or fear. She was not playing to survive. She was playing because she loved it, because it was who she was, because the music was as much a part of her as her heartbeat. The notes flowed from her fingers, like water from a mountain spring, pure and clear and unstoppable. The melody rose and fell, telling a story of loss and hope and triumph. In the front row, Maria was crying, happy tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter live her dream. Carlos was crying too. He remembered all the nights when Elena came home exhausted from work, too tired to even eat. He remembered how she never complained, how she always found the strength to smile and tell him that everything would be okay. Margaret Chen was not crying. She was smiling, the satisfied smile of a teacher who has watched her students surpass her in every way. Elena played through the difficult passages with ease. Her hands flew across the keys like birds in flight. The music built and crashed and soared. And then came the climax, the thunderous section where the music became a storm. Elena attacked the keys with all the passion and power in her soul. The sound filled the entire hall, bouncing off the walls and ceiling, surrounding the audience in a whirlwind of emotion. In the back row, Richard Thornton wiped his eyes. He finally understood. He finally saw what he had tried to destroy, and he realized, perhaps for the first time, how wrong he had been. The storm began to fade. The music became soft and gentle again. The melody returned, but it was different now. It was sadder and more beautiful. It was the sound of acceptance, the sound of peace. Elena played the final notes with tears in her eyes. She let the last chord ring out through the hall. It faded slowly, like a sunset disappearing below the horizon. And then there was silence. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The audience erupted. 2,000 people jumped to their feet. They clapped and cheered and stamped their feet. They cried and laughed and shouted her name. Bravo, bravo, Alina. Alina stood up from the piano and faced the audience. She looked at her mother, who was blowing kisses with both hands. She looked at her brother, who was pumping his fist in the air. She looked at Margaret Chen, who was nodding with pride, and she looked at the empty seat in the back row. Richard Thornton had left. He had slipped away during the applause. Unable to face her triumph, Alina smiled. It was a smile of victory, a smile of gratitude, a smile of love. She had done it. She had followed her dream all the way to the top. She had overcome poverty and illness and cruelty. She had turned her pain into beauty and her struggles into strength. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer the waitress who served champagne at parties. She was Alina Martinez, concert pianist, survivor, star. And her story was just beginning. As she took her final bow, Alina thought about all the young people who would hear her story, all the dreamers who would see her face and think, if she can do it, maybe I can too. That was her true victory. Not the applause or the fame or the success, but the knowledge that her story would inspire others, that her pain would have meaning, that her journey would light the way for those who came after her. Alina walked off the stage. As the applause continued to thunder behind her, she had a lot of work ahead of her. More concerts, more recordings, more lessons to teach and dreams to chase. But for now, she just wanted to hug her mother and her brother. She wanted to thank Margaret Chen for believing in her. She wanted to celebrate with the people who had stood by her. Through everything, she had learned something important over the past 2 years, something that Richard Thornton would never understand. The best revenge is not destroying your enemies. The best revenge is becoming everything they said you could never be. Alina Martinez had become that and more, and she was only getting started.